I'm Eliana Park, 32, a freelance editor and Dad's only child from his first marriage. The morning of the funeral was hot in that thick, sticky kind of way New Jersey summers always promised, but never apologized for. I stood just outside the arched stone gate of Pine Hollow Chapel, holding a cream folder in one hand and my dad's old pocket watch in the other. The hearse had already arrived. People in black moved in silent waves under the trees, their shoes crunching on gravel and dried grass. I could hear the organ faintly echoing inside, playing some somber, forgettable hymn. My name hadn't been on the printed obituary, no mention, no asterisk, not even a typo I could claim as mine. The staff coordinator, a tall woman with tight gray curls and a navy name tag that read Meredith, blocked the gate gently with her clipboard. "Family section is full," she said, not unkindly. "Friends can sit to the left." I blinked. "I'm Eliana, his daughter, the eldest." Meredith scanned her list. "I only have names from the family's submitted version. I don't see you on here." "Sweetie." She didn't say it with malice. It was worse pity. I stepped back, heart beating somewhere in my throat, and let a group of cousins I hadn't seen since I was 10 breeze past me without a glance. They were dressed sharp, unified in mourning. One of them, maybe Ben, looked over his shoulder but turned away before our eyes could meet. My mother had died when I was 8. Dad remarried 2 years later. I'd spent more time with his voicemails than his voice. I tried again, voice thinner now. "Could you just tell him I'm here?" She looked up, confused. "He's passed, dear." My throat tightened. To anyone watching this right now, have you ever shown up to something only to be treated like a ghost in your own story? Have you ever been erased so quietly it took a formal list to notice? If you've felt invisible in your own family, comment where you're watching from. I'm sharing this not for revenge, but because someone out there needs to hear it. And if you've ever faced family drama like this, go ahead and subscribe. This one's for us. I was about to walk away, toward the parking lot where I'd sat for 20 minutes rehearsing what I'd say if I was allowed in, when a man's voice cut through the hushed murmurs. "Wait, Eliana Park." I turned. A short, stern man in a tailored black suit and heavy glasses approached with quick, deliberate steps. "I'm Ron Patel," he said, holding up a lanyard, editor-in-chief of the Ledger. "You're Eliana?" I nodded slowly, confused. He didn't smile. Instead, he pointed at the pocket watch in my hand. "Is that your father's Navy watch? The one from the memorial piece you submitted 2 years ago?" A small ripple of attention moved through the guests. Some turned their heads, others shifted uncomfortably. Ron raised his voice. "Just enough. Everyone should know this young woman wrote the anonymous column that ran in our Father's Day edition last year, about a man who left too soon, who taught her how to fix a hinge and love silence. That man was Frederick Park. And this is his daughter." Silence. Even the organ paused. Meredith lowered her clipboard. Someone gasped behind me. I stood still, caught in a moment I didn't ask for, yet had needed my entire life. The air felt heavier, charged. Every eye turned toward me, not with pity, but with the sharpness of recognition. There was a strange elasticity to the silence that followed, like someone had pulled the atmosphere taut, and we were all just waiting for it to snap. I didn't move. I didn't know how to. My heels sunk slightly into the soft grass as Ron Patel stood beside me, squinting at the crowd as if daring someone to object. The chapel doors opened wider. A few attendees had spilled out, maybe to escape the heat, maybe because they sensed something happening. One of them was my stepmother, Judith. She had aged into elegance, with silver blonde hair pinned high and a long black dress that moved like water. She was flanked by her daughters, my half-sisters, technically, but more like strangers with the same last name. Her gaze swept the scene, landed on me, then narrowed like she'd bitten into something sour. Ron was still speaking, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Her tribute brought in more letters than anything else we've printed on Father's Day. People clipped it. People cried over it. And yet, when I read today's obituary and saw she wasn't mentioned, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Judith stepped forward. "There must be some mistake," she said smoothly, voice honeyed and brittle. "We followed the funeral home's template. Perhaps they edited I've seen enough obituary templates." Ron cut in. "They don't omit children, especially not the one who wrote a national column about their father's love of black coffee and fixing broken birdhouses." Whispers curled through the crowd like smoke. People looking at programs, at me, at Judith. One of the ushers stepped aside quietly and gestured for me to enter. I didn't move until Meredith gave me the smallest, awkward nod, as if to say, "Okay, we get it now." As I walked down the aisle of the chapel, people moved. Some stood to let me pass. Others stayed seated and just turned their heads. I could feel it, the heat of attention, the weight of 100 questions they wouldn't ask aloud. The front row, where Dad's official family sat, had a single empty seat beside Judith. She stiffened when I paused near it. I waited just long enough for her to feel it. Then I took the seat behind her. Second row. Center. Just far enough to remind her I existed. The eulogy began shortly after. It was delivered by a neighbor, not a relative. He spoke of Dad's laugh, his loyalty, his perfectly quiet devotion. It was sanitized, well-written, and utterly forgettable. My name was not mentioned. After the service, in the heat of the parking lot, I stood beside my rental car and watched people trickle out in clusters of 2 or 3. Some nodded at me now, polite. A few avoided my eyes entirely. "Miss Park." It was Ron again. He handed me a folded copy of the Ledger, the city's Sunday edition. "Read page 7, he said. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. There it was, a full-page spread, bordered in black, with a bold header. "The name they forgot, the daughter who remembered it," included my original column, printed in full. Below it, in small italics, "In loving memory of Frederick J. Park, 1956-2023. Survived by his daughters Emily, Rachel, and Eliana." I looked up at Ron. "You printed it again?" He nodded. "I did. And I added the correction. We have journalistic standards. Families may forget names. We don't." It hit me then, not just the correction, but the reversal. The same community that hadn't recognized me 20 minutes ago was now reading my name in bold type, in their hands, on their kitchen tables, on the record. I drove back to the hotel in silence. No radio, no AC, just the warm hum of tires on asphalt and the ticking of Dad's pocket watch on the passenger seat. That night, in my room, I laid the newspaper flat on the bed. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it buzzed again. This time, a message. "Rachel, was that necessary? You made Mom look stupid." The words sliced through the fragile quiet I'd built all day. I didn't reply. I scrolled up, trying to remember the last time we had spoken. It had been Christmas. 2 years ago. I'd sent a card. She hadn't answered. I got into bed and pulled the covers over my chest. Not for warmth, but for weight. I kept the paper beside me, folded again into the shape of my father's absence. The next morning, I walked into Beans & Co., the corner cafe where Dad used to bring me on the weekends during his custody time. Same wobbly chairs, same cinnamon scones. I ordered a black coffee and sat near the back, by the window. An elderly woman in a long floral scarf approached me slowly. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you the girl who wrote that piece in the paper?" I nodded. She smiled. "My husband couldn't stop crying, said it reminded him of our daughter, who we lost young. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for reading," I said. When she left, I turned my face toward the sunlit window and whispered, "You were remembered, Dad." Not by the polished lines of a controlled obituary, but by something messier, truer. I reached into my bag and pulled out a photo one no one else had seen. It was Dad and me, in the garage, building a crooked bookshelf we never finished. He had wood dust on his shirt, and I had a Band-Aid on my cheek from a fall I barely remembered. We were smiling. I tucked the photo into the newspaper's fold, like a letter inside a promise. Outside, people were walking, laughing, drinking iced lattes with their lives unfolding around them. I stayed at the cafe another hour, then finally stood and walked toward the exit. The newspaper remained in my bag, but the part of me that needed to be seen, that part didn't feel erased anymore. I didn't fly home right away. Something kept me rooted in that town, its cracked sidewalks, the sharp smell of pine sap, the street names I used to mispronounce as a kid. I found myself driving aimlessly through neighborhoods that looked smaller now, like someone had shrunk them when I wasn't looking. Dad's old house had been sold years ago, but I still drove past it. The mailbox was a different color. The oak tree we planted the summer I turned 11 had been cut down. It was like watching your own handwriting fade from a page you once wrote. I parked across the street and sat there in silence. There was a child's pink tricycle near the porch now. A wind chime that hadn't been there before jingled lightly in the breeze. Everything was new, but everything was still mine, in a way I couldn't explain. Back at the hotel, I got another text, this one from Emily. "Emily, I didn't know you were still in town. Do you want to meet up for coffee or something?" My first instinct was to ignore it, but the ache in my chest told me I still wanted something I couldn't name. Maybe it was answers. Maybe it was an apology. Maybe I just wanted to see if they looked guilty in person. I replied, "Sure. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Beans & Co. No emojis, no exclamation marks, just the facts." The next morning, I arrived early, sat at the same table by the window, nursing a lukewarm coffee and picking flakes off a cinnamon scone without eating it. Emily arrived 10 minutes late, dressed in something crisp and neutral khaki slacks, a white blouse. Her hair was tied back in a low bun that made her look older than I remembered. She smiled, too quickly. "Hey," she said, setting down her purse. "Hi." We sat in silence for a few beats. "I read your piece," she said finally. "Well, we all did. It was beautiful." I nodded. "Thanks." Another pause. She shifted in her seat. "Mom didn't mean to leave your name out. She wrote what came to mind. In the moment. It was chaotic. She remembered to list the pets," I said flatly. Emily's lips tightened. "I'm not defending it. I'm just saying it wasn't malicious." "Not malicious," I repeated. "Just forgettable." She looked down at the table. "Look, I know you and Dad had your own thing, but after he remarried, things were different. He was tired, pulled in a lot of directions." I felt my hands curling under the table. "Do you remember my 8th birthday?" I asked suddenly. Emily blinked. I don't think so. Dad showed up at my school with cupcakes. He didn't even know there was a rule about outside food. He just walked in with this lopsided tray of chocolate ones he'd made from a box mix. The office let him through because they could tell he meant well." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." He was wearing socks that didn't match. One had a hole in the toe. "He let me skip the afternoon to go to the arcade. He said, 'Today, You get to be the boss. Emily leaned back. I didn't know he did that. No, I said. You didn't. And that's fine. But don't sit across from me now and pretend I wasn't there. I was part of his life. Maybe not in the family photos, but I was the one holding the flashlight when he fixed the sink. I was the one who taught him how to use email. Her voice softened. Eliana, we were kids. We didn't understand how complicated it was. I wasn't asking you to understand it then. I'm asking you not to rewrite it now. We both sat still for a long time. Emily stirred her tea but didn't drink it. When he was dying, she said quietly, he called out your name once, in the hospital. I don't know if he was dreaming or if he thought you were there, but he said your name. My throat caught. I told Mom, she continued, but she didn't know how to bring it up. She thought it might upset you. I looked out the window, at the cars crawling by, at the people living lives that didn't include missing names or secondhand grief. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because I thought you should know, she said, and because you deserve to be seen. We finished our drinks in silence. When she left, we didn't hug, but she looked back once before the door closed, and that was enough. I stayed another 2 days. I visited Dad's grave alone, plot 22B under the old sycamore. I brought wildflowers from a stand off Route 9 and tied them with string. There was no photo on the stone, just his name and the years. But I placed the ledger's folded page beneath the flowers, tucked under a small rock to keep it from flying away. I whispered, it's in print now. No one can erase it. That night, I checked out of the hotel and took the late flight back home. The pocket watch stayed in my coat pocket the entire way, ticking quietly like a heart I had borrowed. Back in my apartment, surrounded by the safety of my books and overwatered plants, I unpacked slowly. I took the newspaper and framed it. Not for the article, but for the correction. That single italic line survived by his daughters Emily, Rachel, and Eliana, the one sentence they couldn't take back. In the weeks that followed, I got a few more messages. Judith never reached out. Rachel sent a cryptic thumbs-up emoji. Emily emailed a photo of Dad from last summer, grayer, thinner, but smiling. And then came the letter. It arrived in a thick white envelope, postmarked locally. Inside was a handwritten note on old ledger paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, tight, slanted, meticulous. It was Dad's. L. If you're reading this, I probably didn't get the chance to say enough things I should have. I messed up in a lot of ways, but I never stopped thinking of you as mine. Thank you for the quiet ways you loved me, Dad. I sat on the floor of my apartment with that letter clutched to my chest like a lifeline. I cried not loudly, but the kind of cry that happens when a locked drawer inside you suddenly swings open. It was the first time I realized something simple and crushing. He did remember me. And maybe that was all I ever needed. The letter lived on my desk for a while. I didn't frame it, didn't laminate it, didn't tuck it into a box like some sacred relic. I kept it in plain sight, folded just once, lying beside my favorite fountain pen and the tiny brass whale paperweight Dad gave me when I got my first editing job. He'd laughed when I opened the box and said, "Every writer needs something heavy to hold them down." I stared at that whale for hours after the letter came. It felt strange, how grief rearranged itself. Before, it had been a numb fog in my chest. Then came the white-hot flicker of anger at Judith, at the obituary, at the polite omission that tried to bury me alive. But after the letter, grief softened. It didn't disappear, but it no longer felt like being erased. It felt like standing in a room where the lights were slowly coming back on. A week later, my phone rang. The caller ID said Ledger Office. I answered with a cautious, "Hello, Eliana. It's Ron Patel." "Hi." Everything okay? I just wanted to say, your story's gotten a lot of traction. We've had readers write in asking about the original column, and quite a few want to know more about your father, or rather, your experience of him. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what that meant. We'd love to feature a follow-up. Not an exposé, not drama, just truth. Maybe a piece on legacy voice. Memory. What's left behind, I hesitated. I'm not a columnist. You're a storyteller, he said. And right now, the world's listening. I told him I'd think about it. And I did. For days. I left my laptop closed and went for long walks. Sat on the floor with old photo albums. Even called my mom's sister in Boston to ask about stories she remembered from when Dad still lived with us. She told me about how he used to make up bedtime stories about squirrels that ran their own post office. I had forgotten that entirely. Eventually. I sat down and opened a blank document. The first line I typed was, "He wasn't always there, but when he was everything." I wrote for hours. I wrote until my back ached and my coffee turned cold. It wasn't about justifying myself. It wasn't about revenge. It was about weaving a thread back through the quiet spaces I had lived in for years. I titled it The Memory Drawer and sent it to Ron before I had the chance to overthink it. The article ran the following Sunday. This time, my name was printed at the top, by Eliana Park. Emails poured in, not dozens, hundreds. Some were from strangers. I haven't spoken to my father in 12 years. Your piece made me want to pick up the phone. Thank you for reminding me that grief isn't about who shouts the loudest at the funeral. Others were quieter. I clipped your first column last year. My son read it to me when I was in hospice. I'm still here. Still clipping. One message came from someone I didn't expect, Mrs. Vargas, my 10th grade English teacher. You always had a voice. Eliana, I'm glad the world is finally hearing it. I cried again, but softer this time, the kind of cry that felt like rain on a dry field. A week after the article came out, I received a padded envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name in tidy black letters. Inside was a photo album. On the inside cover was a note written in blue ink. We found these while cleaning out the attic. Thought you should have them. The E was Emily. No full name, no explanation. The album was old leather bound with corners that had frayed over time. Inside were photos I had never seen. Dad in his 20s, holding a baby I recognized instantly as me. Us in matching Halloween costumes. I was a lion. He was a reluctant zookeeper. A blurry shot of us lying on the living room carpet with a jigsaw puzzle between us. Both of us mid-laugh. On the last page was a photograph I remembered only because I had taken it myself. Dad asleep in the recliner, one hand still holding a screwdriver, glasses slipping down his nose. A half-fixed lamp on the floor beside him. It was nothing special, but it was real. I closed the album gently and pressed it against my chest. It didn't fix everything. Judith never reached out. Rachel kept her distance. And maybe that was for the best. We weren't going to suddenly morph into a Hallmark family overnight. There were still birthdays I wasn't invited to. Still silences that stretched too long. But something had shifted. A month later, I was invited to a community reading at the local library. Ron introduced me. I stood on a modest stage with a microphone that wobbled in its stand, reading parts of my second article aloud to an audience of maybe 25 people. Some brought folded newspapers. Some just came to listen. Afterward, an elderly man in a worn blazer approached me. You said something in your piece, he said, about how the truest parts of us don't need to be published, they just need to be remembered. I nodded. I had written that in a burst of emotion, not expecting anyone to quote it back to me. He smiled. I lost my daughter 5 years ago. Sometimes I talk to her out loud. I like to think memory's a kind of home. Thank you for building one. That night, I walked home under a sky streaked with thin clouds and a sickle moon. I didn't feel erased. I didn't feel like a shadow. I felt present. Dad's watch still ticked in my coat pocket. It wasn't just marking time, it was marking presence. A heartbeat. A proof. Weeks turned into seasons. Leaves fell. Rain came. And one quiet morning, as I was editing a manuscript on grief memoirs, an email popped up from a name I didn't recognize. It read, "Hi, Eliana. I read your piece in the Ledger. I'm the editor of a national anthology on estranged families. Would you be interested in submitting a piece for inclusion Maya Grant? Curator. Broken Roots." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, "Yes. I think I have something worth sharing." What began with a missing name in an obituary had somehow grown into something larger. Not fame, not forgiveness, but recognition. The kind that doesn't fade with time. The kind that lives quietly in the margins of someone else's memory. Growing roots in places you didn't think would hold you. It didn't fix the past, but it rewrote the ending. And this time, my name was on every page. By the time the anthology was published, the air had gone cold again. Late autumn in the city had that amber-gray glow where the sidewalks gleamed after rain and people started walking faster. Coats pulled tight. I received my contributor copy in a plain manila envelope. No ceremony, no ribbon, just weight. Real, dense, like something had finally arrived that had taken years to find its way here. I held it for a long time before I opened it. Inside, there it was. My name printed clearly on the contents page, right between an essay titled "Thanksgiving with Strangers" and another called "The Year My Father Forgot My Voice." My piece was titled "I Wasn't in the Obituary," but I was there the whole time. I didn't read it right away. Not because I was avoiding it, but because it was enough just to know it was there. To know that someone, somewhere, maybe curled up in a too small apartment or sitting in the corner of a bookstore with a coffee going cold, might be flipping to my story without realizing that it would stay with them. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen window. It was something my mom used to do. She'd say, "It's not for anyone in particular. Just in case someone's still trying to find their way home." I guess I was still trying, too. The next day, I went through the box of things I had carried back from New Jersey but hadn't yet unpacked. Some of it was junk receipts, funeral programs, napkins with phone numbers I hadn't called. But buried underneath it all was something I'd forgotten about. A cassette tape. It had Eliana, age 7, written on it in faded Sharpie. I didn't remember packing it, which meant someone, maybe Emily, had quietly slipped it into the box. I stared at it for a few seconds, then pulled out the old tape player I kept for sentimental reasons and pushed it in. A few seconds of static. Then my own voice. Young, high-pitched, breathless with excitement. "Okay, this is me and Daddy, and we're making pancakes, but we're bad at it. Daddy, say hi." Then his voice, low and amused. "Hi, I'm the worst pancake chef on earth, but the best girl, Dad." "Right, A." Giggle. "You're the best dad ever." Then more laughter, the sound of a spatula clattering, and something sizzling in the background. I closed my eyes and listened, not to the tape, really, to time. To that small sliver of life that had somehow survived everything else, the silences, the missed birthdays, the obituary omission. It had made it through. I sat there on the floor with that tape playing over and over until the machine clicked itself off. Then I stayed a little longer, the room dark except for the candlelight still flickering in the window. A few days later, I received another message. This one came through Facebook Messenger of all places. It was from a woman named Clara who claimed to have been Dad's neighbor for 10 years before he passed. Her message read, "Hey, Eliana. I hope this isn't weird. I saw your article in the anthology and realized who you were. Your dad used to talk about you all the time. I don't know what happened between you two, but he always kept your birthday marked on the fridge. Just thought you'd want to know that." I replied, "Thank you. That means more than you know." Then I sat there, looking at the screen, wondering how many versions of my father had existed at once. There was the dad who'd made pancake tapes with me, the dad who remarried and fell into a quieter, tidier version of domestic life. The dad who kept my birthday on his fridge but didn't tell me when he got sick. The dad who whispered my name in a hospital room when I wasn't there. We all leave behind versions of ourselves in other people's memories. Some versions we craft, some we can't control, and some, like the version of me that wasn't included in his obituary, are simply forgotten. But memories are strange. They rise, sometimes in newspaper columns, sometimes in neighbor messages, sometimes in the silence between words on a page. The anthology gained some quiet momentum. A podcast invited me to speak about family estrangement. Then a local book club emailed, asking if I'd do a Q&A after their meeting. I said yes to everything, not because I wanted attention, but because for once, I had something to say and people who actually wanted to hear it. One afternoon, after a virtual book event, I received a surprise package at my doorstep. It was from Emily. Inside was a framed photo, a real one, me and Dad, at what looked like a high school science fair. He had his arm around me, and we were both looking at a makeshift volcano model I vaguely remembered panicking over the night before it was due. There was a post-it note stuck to the glass. "You were there more than we saw. Sorry it took this long to look back." No flourish, no over-sentimentality, just truth. I put it on my shelf, next to the anthology. That evening, I went for a walk around my neighborhood. The city was turning gold again. Late autumn dressed in its last coat before winter stripped it bare. Kids were drawing chalk skeletons on the sidewalks. A couple argued softly near the corner bodega. The air smelled like cinnamon and wet pavement. I passed a little bookstore with its lights still on and paused to look through the window. On a small table near the front, I saw the anthology. My name there. Again. Real. In the world. A man in a beanie picked up the book, flipped through the pages, then nodded to himself and carried it to the counter. I smiled. He didn't know me. Didn't know the pain of watching your own name disappear from the record of someone you loved. But maybe, when he read my words, he would feel something shift. Maybe he'd call someone he hadn't talked to in years, or maybe he'd simply sit in silence and remember someone properly. That was enough. Back home, I wrote a new letter. Not for publishing, not for sharing, just for Dad. Dear Dad, I got your letter. I heard the tape. I saw the photos. I was never trying to be perfect. I just wanted to be remembered. And now I am. Love. Eliana. I folded it and tucked it into the back of the framed photo. Then I turned off the lights, opened the window slightly to let the cool air in, and sat with the quiet, not the silence of being excluded, but the quiet of being at peace. I didn't need a stage. I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't even need my name in bold. I just needed what I had always deserved a place in the story. And now, finally, it was mine. I returned to Pine Hollow only once after the funeral. It was spring by then, late April. The grounds were green again, almost unnaturally so, with that particular brightness that only fresh grief or new grass can carry. I had taken the early train down from the city, half hoping I'd arrive before the place woke up, before any other visitors could ask who I was or why I had come back. I brought two things with me: a single tulip, orange with red streaks, and a printout of the anthology page where my name appeared beside the title of my piece. I didn't bring a suitcase. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. This wasn't a pilgrimage. It was something simpler. It was a return. Plot 22B was easy to find now. I didn't have to ask Meredith or scan the numbered plaques the way I had during the funeral. I knew the way by heart, as if my feet had memorized it. The headstone was the same modest, clean, gray, no embellishment, no quote, just Frederick J. Park, 1956 and 2023. The grass had grown in around it. There was a plastic wreath on a wire stand beside it, probably from Emily or Rachel. I didn't move it. I didn't need to. I sat down cross-legged in front of the grave like I used to sit on the living room carpet as a kid when Dad read the newspaper on Sunday mornings. I placed the tulip gently across the stone and set the printed page beside it. The wind picked up, tugging at the paper. So I weighed it down with a small stone from the path. I didn't speak at first, just listened. Bird song, the occasional rustle of branches, distant traffic, a cough from somewhere deeper in the cemetery. Then I said, quietly, I forgive you. The words didn't echo. They didn't change the world, but they shifted something inside me, a quiet loosening, a thread finally untied. I'm still angry, I added, but I forgive you for not knowing how to hold all of us. I forgive you for disappearing when I needed you visible, and I forgive you for loving me in silence when what I needed was sound. I closed my eyes, not to pray, just to sit in that moment longer, to imagine what it might have been like if he had lived another year. Would we have tried again? Would he have asked me to write his obituary properly? Would he have let me? When I opened my eyes again, I saw that the tulip had tipped slightly in the breeze, petal curling toward the page beneath it. It looked almost like a bow, or a nod. I stayed for 20 minutes. Then I stood, brushed the grass from my skirt, and walked back to the main path. As I passed the chapel, Meredith stepped out of the side door holding a clipboard and a paper cup of coffee. She saw me, paused, then smiled faintly. Back again. Just visiting. She glanced toward the far rows of gravestones, then back at me. You know, I read your article, the one they reprinted. Oh, she nodded. My daughter sent it to me. Said, this is how I felt when Grandma died. Meredith sipped her coffee. We don't always know what people carry. You put it into words. Thank you. She hesitated. We made copies of the correction that ran in the paper. For our records. Would you like one? I smiled. I already have the original, but thank you. She gave me a nod and turned back toward the chapel. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I took the long way home, stopped at the bakery on Pine and 4th where Dad used to buy those oversized oatmeal cookies he claimed were basically breakfast. I bought 2, one for me and one for the memory of him. I ate them both on the train while watching trees blur into soft green smudges against the window. Back in my apartment, I hung a new frame on the wall. Inside it was the anthology page, the tulip now pressed flat between 2 sheets of glass, and a small caption at the bottom in my handwriting. The story was mine, all along, that summer. I began a new project. It wasn't about Dad, not directly. It was a podcast. Just me, a microphone, and stories from people who had also been forgotten, estranged siblings, left-out daughters, invisible sons, second families no one ever talked about. I called it Unwritten Lines. The first episode was just 15 minutes long. I recorded it late at night, candle flickering beside me. The old tape of Dad and me sitting on the desk for quiet courage. I said, this is for anyone who ever got left out of the photo, anyone whose name wasn't in the program, who didn't get the call, who found out too late, or never found out at all. Your story still counts, and if no one else will write it anyway. I didn't expect much, but the messages came. People from all over. Strangers who had sat through weddings and funerals feeling like shadows. People who weren't named in wills. People who had shown up to hospital rooms only to be turned away by new spouses or bitter siblings. Each message added another stitch to the quilt I didn't know I was sewing. A soft armor of remembrance. Proof that being left out didn't mean being unloved. One listener sent in a voice message that said, "Your story gave me permission to believe mine still mattered." I listened to it 3 times. That fall, I visited a local college to speak about personal narrative. One of the students raised her hand during Q&A and asked, "Do you think being written out made you stronger?" I paused. "No," I said. "It made me invisible, but fighting my way back made me honest." The class went quiet. I smiled. And I'll take honest over strong any day. After the talk, a girl waited until everyone had left before she came up to me. She didn't say anything. She just handed me a folded note and walked away. I opened it on the train ride home. It read, "My dad died last year. His obituary mentioned everyone but me. I thought I was going crazy. Thank you for reminding me that I'm not invisible." I folded the note and slipped it into my journal. The journal that used to be about grief. It wasn't anymore. Now, it was about return. Not resurrection, not redemption, just return. To self, to presence, to the truth that no one, not an editor, not a stepmother, not a funeral coordinator can take away the life you actually lived. And as long as someone speaks it, as long as someone writes it down, it survives. My name wasn't in the obituary, but it's on the page now. It's in the airwaves. It's in the quiet spaces where stories begin again. Fall deepened, and with it came a kind of clarity I hadn't expected. I no longer looked over my shoulder every time someone said the word family. I no longer paused at the edge of bookstore aisles when I saw grief memoirs, wondering whether I belonged among their pages or had simply forced myself in. I belonged, not because someone else said so, but because I had lived it. By late October, the podcast had reached its 10th episode. I decided to make it something quieter. No guests, no submissions. Just my voice and the sound of rain I'd recorded one evening by my window. The theme was ghosts that are still alive, people who aren't dead, but who've disappeared from our lives in ways that feel permanent. I told the story of a voicemail I'd kept from Dad. It was short, less than 15 seconds. He had called during one of his half-hearted reconnection attempts, left a message saying, "Hey, Elle, it's me. I was just, well, nothing urgent. Call if you want. Or not. Okay." And then a pause before he hung up. That pause had lived in my phone for years. I said into the mic, "Sometimes, the people who hurt us don't realize the weight of the silence they leave. But even silence has shape. Even a forgotten voicemail is a kind of letter." When I finished recording, I didn't cry. I just saved the file, uploaded it, and made a cup of tea. There was healing in the ordinariness of it all. A few weeks later, I received an invitation in the mail, thick cardstock, gold foil letters, the kind that felt expensive even before you opened it. It was from Judith. A memorial scholarship in Dad's name had been established at his alma mater, and there would be a small ceremony for donors and family. My name was listed among the invitees. I sat with the envelope for hours. I reread it 3 times. And then, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I said yes. I didn't tell anyone. Not Emily, not my friends, not my podcast listeners. I just went. The event was held in a stone hall on campus, surrounded by old brick buildings and trees shedding their last yellow leaves. The kind of place that smelled like wood polish, distant rain, and formality. The kind of place that was designed for people like Judith. I arrived early, wore a charcoal dress, low heels, hair tied back in the way Dad always said made me look serious and kind at the same time. I sat near the back, not to hide, but to observe. People arrived in clusters: alumni, board members, a few local officials. Then came Judith, regal in a navy coat dress, and beside her, Emily and Rachel, both polished, both tense. They didn't see me at first. I didn't wave. The program began with a few polite speeches about legacy and leadership, then a slideshow of Dad's life photos of him in college, on boats, shaking hands at conferences, one of him holding Rachel as a baby, one of him teaching Emily to ride a bike. None of me. And yet, I didn't flinch. I had already done the work. I didn't need to appear in someone else's slideshow to know I existed. Then something unexpected happened. The last photo was of him in his garage, sitting on a stool, hands covered in sawdust. And there, barely visible in the corner, was a small version of me, maybe 7, maybe 8, watching him work. It wasn't centered. It wasn't labeled. But it was there. After the program, there was a reception, cheese plates, sparkling cider, soft jazz in the background. Judith approached me slowly, a glass in hand. "Eliana," she said. "Judith." A pause stretched between us. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either." She nodded once. "I read your anthology piece. Did you?" "Yes. I didn't agree with all of it," she said carefully. "But it was honest. And it was brave." I didn't answer. She looked around the room, then back at me. "Fred loved you. You know. He just didn't always know how to show it." "I know," I said. "And sometimes, neither did I." Another pause. Softer this time. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I'm here because I realized something." "What's that?" "You can't erase someone just because they don't fit the picture." I didn't smile, but something inside me loosened. She lifted her glass slightly, then moved on. Emily came next. "Hey," she said, awkward but sincere. "Hi. That photo in the garage, that was yours? Wasn't it?" I shrugged. "He used to keep it in a drawer. I found it when we were boxing things up. Thought it should be in there. Thank you. I'm sorry it took so long." I looked at her. Me too. But we didn't linger in the pain. We just stood together for a minute. Two sisters in name. Maybe something more now. Rachel didn't approach. That was fine. Some gaps stay unclosed. Some people aren't meant to return. I didn't stay long after that. I didn't need to. The weight of being seen, of being named, even in a corner of a photograph, was enough. On the way out, I passed the donation table. The scholarship fund had a simple framed plaque beside it. I glanced at it casually, then stopped. It read, "The Frederick J. Park Memorial Fund, in honor of a father, mentor, and maker of quiet moments, established by his family, Judith Park, Emily Park, Rachel Park, and Eliana Park." There it was. Not bolded, not underlined, not shouted from a podium, but present. On the train home, I rested my head against the window and watched the trees blur by. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. Tired, but whole. Later that night, I lit a candle again. This time, not to guide anyone home, but to mark that I had made it back. To myself. To the place where I wasn't begging for space, but simply living in it. A week after the ceremony, I received a final message. This one from the publisher of the anthology. "Eliana, your piece has resonated more than we expected. Would you be open to turning your story into a full-length memoir? We think it's a voice people need. Let us know. Warmly, Jen." I stared at the message. I thought of the obituary that left me out, the newspaper correction that put me back in, the tape, the photo, the plaque, the quiet moments that had shaped an entire life, unseen but real. Then I clicked reply. Jen. Yes. I think I'm finally ready to write the whole story. And this time, it would begin with me. I started writing the memoir 2 weeks after signing the contract. It felt different from anything I'd written before. The anthology piece had been sharp, compressed like trying to pour a gallon of feeling into a thimble. The podcast episodes were intimate, conversational, a stitched quilt of other people's forgotten echoes. But this was mine. This was the room where I finally got to close the door and speak from the center of the silence. I bought a new notebook, thick with creamy pages, and labeled it simply Park. No subtitle, no epigraph yet, just the name I had carried, questioned, been written out of, and now claimed fully, with no permission asked. At first, the pages came slowly. I wrote about the first time I realized I was an afterthought, not at the funeral, not at the obituary desk, but much earlier, in a dentist's waiting room when I was 11. My name wasn't on the emergency contact form. I had told the receptionist it was a mistake. She'd just shrugged. I wrote about Dad's hands, how they always smelled faintly of metal and pine, like he was half human, half toolbox. How he never wore cologne but always carried that trace of sweat and sawdust, grounding and unmistakable. I wrote about how grief changes shape when it has nowhere to go, how it settles behind the ribs, like damp air in the walls of a house no one lives in anymore. By the end of the first month, I had 20,000 words and a folder full of scanned photos. The publisher loved the direction. It's not just a story of loss, Jen said in her email. It's a story of reclamation, of re-entry. I like that. Re-entry. Like coming back into orbit after being weightless for too long. In the middle of this creative momentum, something unexpected arrived in the mail. It was a large envelope, addressed in tidy handwriting I recognized immediately. Emily. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in tissue. A note lay on top. I thought this belonged to you more than it did to us. I found it tucked in the back of Dad's top drawer. Love. E. I unfolded the tissue slowly. It was a copy of my birth certificate. Not the usual hospital printout, the ornate one, the kind they used to issue with gold embossing and thick seals. It had Dad's signature at the bottom. I hadn't seen it in years, but there was something else. Too. A letter. Not typed. Not formal. Just a torn notebook page, folded 4 times. Eliana, I know I haven't earned the right to explain things, but if you're reading this, I guess it means you're still listening. I want you to know I never forgot you. Not once. Not in the quiet mornings or the busy years. I didn't know how to be a father to 2 families. I thought loving you quietly was safer. I see now that it wasn't love, it was fear. You were never invisible to me. I just couldn't face the parts of myself I left behind. I hope one day you'll write your story, even if I'm not in every chapter. I'll be reading from wherever I am. Love. Dad. I read it again and again, then folded it neatly, slipped it into the back cover of my notebook, and stared out the window for a long time. The sky was just beginning to shift into winter, the kind of blue that looks like it's been holding its breath for the next few days. I didn't write, not because I was stuck, but because I was letting the letter settle. There's a difference between moving on and integrating something into you. This letter didn't change everything, but it made some of the bruises in my memory soften at the edges. Eventually, I returned to the manuscript, and this time, I didn't just write about being forgotten. I wrote about the tenderness that still existed in the margins. About the time Dad let me fall asleep in his recliner while he sanded a broken table leg beside me. About the time he bought me a used typewriter because I said I wanted to write like the old poets. About how he'd leave me voicemails and hang up before the beep, as if he just needed to know my phone was still there. These memories didn't erase the others. They stood beside them, like strangers finally learning how to share the same room. As winter deepened, the book took shape. The title came easily. The name they forgot. The publisher loved it, said it had weight and mystery, said people would feel something just reading the spine. I didn't care about the marketing. I just wanted it to exist. As I neared the final chapters, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Rachel. I didn't call. I wrote her a letter. Rachel, I know we haven't spoken. I'm not writing to ask for anything. Just to say I'm finishing the book. You're in it. Not as a villain. Just as someone who stood at the same table and saw a different meal. I'm trying to tell the truth without causing more harm. If there's anything you want to say, this is your moment. Eliana. A week passed. Then two. Then an email. Subject. The book, you're right. We saw different things. I didn't understand what it meant to be left out until I lost someone I thought would never leave. If you're telling the truth, then thank you. Just don't leave yourself out either. R. I read it 3 times. Then I went back and rewrote the opening chapter. Not out of guilt. Out of growth. I added a new line before they forgot my name. I had already started to forget my own. This is how I found it again. The day the manuscript was accepted. I went back to Beans & Co. and sat by the window where I had met Emily months before. I ordered a black coffee and a cinnamon scone. The same chair. The same sound of the bell above the door. Only now. I wasn't holding grief. I was holding a finished story. As I sat there, a woman about my age came up to me, hesitant. Are you Eliana Park? I nodded. I heard you speak at the campus event about being written out. I just wanted to say, my dad left when I was 10. Never called. Your podcast helped me stop thinking that meant I didn't matter. She didn't stay. She just smiled and walked out, coat flaring behind her. I didn't cry. I smiled back. Sometimes, being seen doesn't come in applause or headlines. Sometimes it's a stranger's nod, a name on a scholarship plaque, a voice that trembles but speaks anyway. I opened my notebook one last time that day and wrote, "This is not an ending. This is the sound of a name spoken aloud finally, fully, without apology." And then I closed the book. The first time I held the finished book in my hands, it felt lighter than I expected. Not weightless, just right. The way something feels when it no longer carries your grief, but your truth. The cover was simple pale gray with the title in raised black letters, The Name They Forgot. No photo, no tagline, just the absence, made deliberate. I ran my fingers across the embossed lettering, pausing over each word as if I were reading my own name in Braille. The publisher sent me 20 author copies in a box so heavy I had to drag it down the hall of my apartment building. I didn't open them right away. I left the box by my desk and just sat beside it for a while, listening to the hum of the radiator and the distant sound of sirens outside. Some part of me still didn't believe it was real, but it was. A week before the official release, I got a call from Ron Patel, the same man who had stood up for me outside Pine Hollow almost a year ago. "Eliana," he said, "I've got news." I smiled. "You're always calling with news. This one's different. The Ledger is doing a Sunday spread 5 pages. Early feature. It's about forgotten voices, community grief, memory keepers. And we want you at the center of it." I blinked. "Wait. Like a cover?" "Not just the cover," he said. "The story. We'll republish your original column, excerpts from the memoir, And a new interview. A full circle moment. The phrase hung in the air, full circle. I thought back to that day outside the chapel. Being turned away. The tight knot in my throat. The clipboard with my name missing. And now, my name was not only remembered, it was headline. I said yes. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday, in a quiet cafe uptown with soft lighting and brick walls that smelled of cinnamon and old coffee grounds. The journalist was a young woman named Maurice, bright-eyed and attentive. She began with the usual, "Tell me how this all started." I gave her the short version, the obituary, the funeral, the pocket watch, the newspaper correction. I left out the rawer parts, the voicemail, the tape, the pain of being treated like a stranger at your own father's farewell. Then she asked, "Do you think writing the book was your way of making peace?" I considered that. "No," I said. "It wasn't about peace. It was about presence." I didn't want to move on. I wanted to move in, into the space they left for me. She nodded and scribbled something in her notebook. And now she asked, "Do you feel whole?" I smiled. "Slow. I feel named." The article ran that Sunday. 5 pages. A pull quote across the second spread that read, "Some people live their whole lives waiting to be invited into their own story." I decided to walk in anyway. The response was overwhelming. Booksellers called to place bulk orders. Old friends reached out to say they saw my face in the paper. One woman even emailed me a photo, her daughter, 11 years old, reading the article aloud to their dog. It was surreal, but not in the dizzying way fame often is. It felt earned, like standing up after being quiet for too long. I started getting invitations. A university literature panel, a grief and memory summit, a small family history podcast, a church book club in Minnesota. Even a prison reading group requested copies, saying, "Most of us were left out of something. We get it." Everywhere I went, someone always asked the same question. Eventually, "What would your dad think of all this?" The first few times, I didn't know how to answer. But then one night, while preparing for a panel discussion on legacy and silence, I finally found it. I stood at the podium, looking out at the small crowd, students, teachers, retirees in cardigans. I took a deep breath. "My father," I said, "was a quiet man. He didn't leave behind volumes of diaries or published works. He left behind unfinished projects, scratched-up tools, a half-fixed lamp, and 3 daughters with 3 different stories of who he was. None of them were wrong, but none of them were whole on their own." I paused. I think if he saw this book, this talk, this strange little afterlife we've built together, he'd smile, shake his head, say, "You always did have something to say." And maybe he'd finally listen. Afterward, an older woman with silver hair came up to me, tears in her eyes. "My sister died last year," she whispered. "She was always the one who spoke up. I used to resent that. But now I think, maybe she was just writing us into the story." I held her hand, said nothing. There are moments when silence says enough. Winter came early that year, the kind of cold that feels ancient, like it belongs to the bones more than the air. One evening, I sat at my desk and looked at the last copy of the book in my apartment. I wrapped it carefully, added a note, and walked to the post office 3 blocks away. The envelope was addressed to Pine Hollow Memorial, care of Meredith. The note read, "For your reading room, for the clipboard that forgot, for everyone who walks in feeling unseen. E.P." I walked home slowly, scarf wrapped tight, feeling the wind tug at the ends of my coat. That night, I received an unexpected voicemail. "Hi, Eliana. It's Judith." I froze. I hadn't heard her voice since the scholarship event. I just wanted to say, I read the book. Twice. You wrote the truth, even when it hurt. You could have made me a monster, but you didn't. You gave me humanity I probably didn't earn. She paused. I'm sorry for how things unfolded. I'm sorry I didn't say your name when it mattered. I say it now. Eliana. Click. No goodbye. No invitation to lunch. Just the sound of a door creaking open somewhere in the distance. I let the message sit in my inbox. I didn't replay it. Didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some acknowledgments don't ask for answers. They simply arrive. Late, but real. And sometimes, that's enough. A few days later, I stood in front of a mirror before a reading event in Brooklyn. I wore the necklace Dad gave me at 16, a simple silver pendant with my initials engraved on the back. I had nearly thrown it away once, in anger. Now, I wore it with calm. The bookstore was full that night. People squeezed between shelves, cups of cider in their hands, listening quietly as I read the final passage from The Name They Forgot. If no one names you, you name yourself. If no one tells the story right, you tell it better. And if you ever find yourself missing from the page, turn it. Maybe you were meant to write the next one. I closed the book. Applause echoed gently, but I didn't hear it. I only heard one voice in my memory. Hey, Elle, it's me. Call if you want. Or not. And this time, I whispered back, even if no one could hear it. I called back. Dad. I called the whole world. Book tour fatigue set in quietly, like fog rolling in beneath a door. It wasn't dramatic. No breakdowns in hotel rooms or flights missed from exhaustion, just a slow ache behind the eyes, a kind of spiritual jet lag from telling the same story, over and over again, to people who hadn't lived it, smiling politely while strangers cried in my arms, answering questions from radio hosts who asked if I ever got over being left out of the obituary, as if grief were a mountain with a summit and a flag at the top. I started to dream of silence again, not absence. Silence. There's a difference. Absence is being erased. Silence is choosing when to speak. After my last event in Portland, I returned to my apartment, dropped my suitcase just inside the door, and sat cross-legged on the floor for over an hour, still in my coat. I didn't check emails. I didn't look at sales figures. I didn't reread reviews, even the kind ones. I just sat there, staring at the framed photo of Dad and me by the garage. For the first time in months, I asked myself, not the audience, not my editor, what now? The book was done. The interviews were over. The stage was quiet. What now? I didn't have an answer. So I started walking again. Each morning, I'd leave the apartment just after sunrise, headphones around my neck but no music playing. I walked without destination, letting the city lead me, street by street, block by block, letting memory surface where it wanted. One morning, I found myself in front of the old post office, the one where Dad and I used to go to mail my birthday thank you cards. I stood on the curb, staring through the windows, remembering the way he used to tilt the scales with his hand, pretending the envelopes weighed 10 pounds. Gonna need a forklift for this one, he'd say. I laughed out loud just thinking about it. The woman walking past me looked over, confused. I didn't care. Another morning, I walked past the alley behind the old community center where I had once performed a poem about shadows in 6th grade. I remembered Dad clapping too loud in the front row, whistling with his fingers. Later, when I was embarrassed, he said, "If I don't clap like that, who will these memories didn't come to haunt me? They came to stay. Not the painful ones, not the omissions. Just the real ones. Unforced, unpolished, warm as breath on cold glass." I began to write again, not a book, not a podcast, not anything for public consumption. Just a small blue notebook. No lines, no structure. I wrote what I remembered and what I hoped no one else would forget. One entry simply said Dad cried once when I told him I hated him. He didn't yell, just said, "Okay, I'll be here anyway." That's how I learned what quiet love sounds like. Another said, "The world tried to write me out, but the paper was never theirs. It was mine. It always was." The notebook filled slowly. I didn't rush it. Each page was a landing, a return. That December, I received an invitation to speak at a library conference in New Jersey less than 15 minutes from Pine Hollow. I hesitated. The idea of going back again made my chest feel tight, like a belt pulled one notch too far, but I said yes. Not out of obligation, out of something gentler completion. The event was small 30 people seated between bookshelves that smelled like history and binding glue. I read a section from the memoir's final chapter, then closed the book. During Q&A, a man stood up in the back. "Do you think your father would be proud of you now?" he asked. I looked at him. Then I looked at my hands. "I think he already was." I said, "He just didn't know how to say it." After the event, I drove out to Pine Hollow. No tulip this time, no anthology page, just me. The grave looked the same. The wreath was gone, but the stone still held his name like a whisper. I sat beside it on the cold grass and spoke softly. "Hi, Dad." The wind rustled in response. I finished the book. A pause. "You're in it." Another pause. "But so am I." I smiled. I made sure of that. I took the blue notebook from my bag, tore out one page I'd written that morning and tucked it beneath a loose edge of the stone. It said, "I forgave you long before I knew I could. Not for what you did, but for what you couldn't. That's love, too." I stood up, brushed off my coat, and walked away. Not with heaviness, not with triumph, just with presence. On the drive back, I took a detour, found myself parked outside our old house again, but this time, I didn't just sit there. I got out, walked to the sidewalk, looked at the porch where Dad used to drink his coffee in silence while I drew chalk stars on the pavement. The family who lived there now had put up holiday lights, warm yellow ones that blinked slowly. I didn't knock, didn't need to. I just whispered, "Thank you," and walked back to the car. A week later, on New Year's Eve, I stayed in. No parties, no countdowns, just me, a candle, and the cassette player. I played the pancake tape one more time, listened to my childhood voice and his messy, flawed whole. When the tape clicked off, I let the silence fill the room. Then I opened a new notebook, and on the first page, I wrote, "This is where the story doesn't end. This is where it continues." Because it does. In the way I show up for myself now. In the way I speak when silence used to be safer. In the way I name what I was afraid to claim. Because some stories don't ask for closure. They ask for courage. To speak. To remember. To write the name they forgot again and again until it becomes unerasable. I didn't think it would feel so quiet once everything was done. The book was out. The podcast had ended its final season with a message thanking listeners for holding space with me. The media cycle slowed to a trickle. No more interview requests. No more panels or bookstore signings. People moved on to the next debut, the next grief memoir, the next woman with a microphone and a wound turned into wisdom. But I didn't feel abandoned. I felt still. Still in the way a lake goes glassy after a storm. Still in the way a person finally hears themselves breathe. I woke up on a Tuesday and realized for the first time in years I had nowhere I needed to be. No inbox full of expectations. No voice to project outward. I didn't even know what to do with that kind of spaciousness. So I started cleaning. Drawers, cabinets, digital folders filled with notes I didn't remember writing. At the back of one file labeled Personal Drafts, I found a half-finished email to my father. Dated 4 years ago. Subject re. Hey, I know we don't talk much, but I wanted you to know I'm okay. I got a new job, and I've started writing again. You used to tell me I had a voice. I think you were right. Maybe one day, you'll get to read something with my name on it. I never sent it. At the time, I was afraid he wouldn't reply, or worse, that he would, and it wouldn't mean anything. I closed the draft, but I didn't delete it. Instead, I printed it out, folded it, slipped it inside a blank envelope. Then I pulled on my coat, left my apartment, and walked it down to the mailbox on the corner. I dropped it in, not because it would go anywhere, but because I needed to believe that something always does. That night, I called Emily. No occasion, no agenda. She picked up, surprised but warm. Eliana, everything okay? Yeah, I said. I just felt like hearing someone who remembers the sound of his laugh. She was quiet for a second, then said, I still hear it when I make fun of his old jokes. I laughed, like the one about the broken toaster. It's not broken, it's just protesting its working conditions. We said it in unison and both groaned at the same time. It was the first real laugh we'd shared in months, maybe longer. Do you miss him more now? She asked. Sometimes, but not in the way I used to. How's that? I used to miss what I didn't get. Now I miss what I had. Even the small stuff. The things I forgot to count as love. Emily sighed. I know exactly what you mean. We talked for almost an hour. About life, work, weather. Not about Judith. Not about Rachel. We didn't need to say what hadn't healed yet. Some wounds don't close. They just stop stinging when the wind hits. Before hanging up, she said, Hey, I'm glad you called. Me too. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and looked around my apartment. On the shelf, the photo of Dad in the garage, the anthology, the framed newspaper correction, the tape recorder. All the pieces of the story I'd once thought were scattered now lived together. Not in harmony, but in honesty. And that was enough. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a card, plain white, with a single sentence printed in small italic font. Thank you for naming what I couldn't. That was it. No signature, no explanation. I stared at the card for a long time, then placed it beside the blue notebook, which now sat on my nightstand. That evening, I lit a candle not for grief, or memory, or longing, just for light. A quiet, ordinary light. Weeks passed. I began teaching a writing class at the local community center. Nothing formal. Just Wednesday nights in a drafty room with mismatched chairs and flickering fluorescents. I called the class Voice in Absence. 10 students signed up. Some came to write memoirs. Others came because they'd lost someone. A few just wanted to find the right words for feelings they'd buried under years of politeness. On the second night, I asked them to write a letter to someone who never said goodbye. Not to send, not to edit, just to write. One woman cried. A teenage boy wrote for 20 minutes straight without lifting his pen. An older man folded his letter into a paper crane. I didn't read any of them. I just said, You don't have to share. You already did the brave part. When class ended, one student lingered. She was quiet, maybe early 20s, with nervous hands and a voice that cracked when she asked, Do you think everyone deserves to be remembered? I looked at her. Then I said, Yes. Even if they're the ones who forgot us first. She nodded. Didn't smile, but she walked out with steadier steps. That night, I thought of Dad again. Not the funeral, not the omission, not the pain, just him, humming off key in the kitchen, trying to flip a pancake with a metal spoon, the sound of a laugh before shame could rewrite it. The first time he told me I had a good eye for stories, I lay in bed, eyes closed, and whispered, "I remember you." No audience, no applause, just truth, spoken into the quiet. The next morning, I opened the blue notebook and wrote, "Love doesn't always get printed. It doesn't always arrive in time, but it lingers. In tape recordings, in forgotten drawers, in the silence where someone used to be. I was left out, but I was never gone." I closed the notebook, then opened a blank one, because every ending is also an opening, and I had finally learned that I didn't need anyone's permission to begin. The day the first reader wrote to say my book had changed her life, I was barefoot in the kitchen, holding a chipped mug and watching the kettle hiss. Her message appeared in my inbox like a whisper. "Dear Eliana, I'm not sure how to start this. I just finished your book." And I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot for 30 minutes afterward, crying. Not because it was sad, but because it made me remember I'm real. You said things I've been trying to say my whole life. Thank you for writing it, for naming it, for reminding me that being forgotten doesn't mean you don't matter. Melissa H. I reread the message 3 times, hand resting against the counter, then opened a new folder on my laptop and labeled it Letters That Matter. I copied her email into it. The folder stayed open on my desktop for weeks. Each time someone else reached out a quiet message, a private comment, a forwarded voice memo from a friend of a friend, I added it to the collection. They weren't fan mail. They were echoes. People who had been waiting for someone to say it first. After a while, I stopped being surprised. Grief, it turns out, is one of the few languages we all understand. But being erased, being unacknowledged in your own story, that hits deeper. And when someone dares to say, "I was left out," it gives others permission to whisper, "Me too." That fall, the community center asked me to host a special workshop titled Writing the Missing Self. It would be a 2-day retreat, limited seats, all focused on reclaiming lost names, unlabeled identities, silences passed down like heirlooms. I said yes, not because I felt fully healed, but because I no longer believed healing had to come first. The room we used had high ceilings and terrible acoustics, but the light was perfect. Late autumn sun pouring through dust-speckled windows. There were 12 of us, 10 women, 2 men, ages ranging from 19 to 73. I opened with a question. If no one ever told your story, what would be the first sentence you'd write for yourself? Silence stretched. Then, one by one, they wrote. I walked among them slowly, not reading, just listening to the scratching of pens on paper, a sound I had come to revere like the soft drumbeat of people returning to their own bodies. At the end of the day, I shared something, too. Not a reading from the book, not a polished quote. I read a letter I'd written but never mailed. Dad, you never met the version of me that could stand in front of a room and say I deserve to be named. But I met her. And I want to tell you she's not angry anymore. She's just awake. And she's still yours, even if your silence kept her waiting. Love. Eliana. The room stayed quiet long after I finished. One participant, a man with deep wrinkles and a poet's eyes, raised his hand and said, "You said we don't need closure to begin." That's the first true thing I've heard in years. That evening, I returned home and opened the blue notebook again. I hadn't written in it for a while. It was almost full now, pages curling slightly at the edges, smudges of ink where I'd pressed too hard or cried too freely. I wrote, "The story never ends. It only becomes quieter, like footsteps fading into a hallway where you no longer need to follow. I have arrived." And then I gently closed the cover. The next morning, I got a call from Ron Patel again. He'd become something of an accidental friend, a voice that popped up at unexpected intervals, always carrying news that felt like it mattered. "Eliana," he said, "you won't believe this. Try me." The name they forgot is being added to the high school curriculum in 3 states. They're piloting a unit on personal narrative and erasure. Your book's on the list. I didn't respond at first. I had to sit down. "Teenagers," he continued, "are going to read your story and talk about who gets remembered and who doesn't." I pictured a classroom, messy desks, half-hearted posters on the wall, maybe a teacher who still believed in literature. I imagined a quiet student at the back, flipping pages, stumbling across a sentence like, "If no one puts your name on the list, write it in the margins," and feeling, for the first time, that their voice belonged. I don't know what to say. I told Ron, "You already said it." He replied, "You just didn't know who would be listening." That night, I walked to the bookstore where I'd done my very first reading. The window display had changed. It now featured holiday books and cookbooks and shiny memoirs from famous people, but tucked in the corner, near a basket of bookmarks, I spotted a single spine, gray, embossed. Mine. I walked in, picked it up, and stood there for a while just holding it. The clerk smiled at me. "You know, people come in asking for this one a lot." I looked up. "Do they?" "Yeah. They usually say, 'The one about the girl who got left out but wrote herself back in.'" I smiled. That night, I mailed one more copy of the book, this time to someone who had never asked for it. Judith. Inside. I tucked a short note: "I don't need anything in return. But if you ever wonder what I kept and what I let go, this is all of it. I hope, someday, it helps you find peace. Eliana." No signature, no expectation, just the gift of the story, placed gently at her feet. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons changed. Letters still came. Fewer now. But each one still carved into me in the best way. I began to work on new things: fiction, essays, even a children's book about a girl who builds a museum out of forgotten objects. But I always returned to one truth, one breath, one name, my own. I was no longer angry. I was no longer invisible. I was written, fully, deliberately. And I had written others, too, in every workshop, every talk, every email answered at 1 a.m. I had pulled people out of their own margins and whispered, "You were always here. You were never gone." And the best part? They believed me. So I kept going, not to prove anything, not to finish something, but because stories don't die. They keep walking, even after the book is closed, even after the candle burns out, even when your name is forgotten. Especially then, you rise, and you speak, and you begin again.